Thanks so much for having me back. I'm really excited to visit with y'all some more. Uh, I am Dr. Casey is former director of the Urban Ag program at Dallas College. I was responsible for helping install the greenhouses at El Centro, purchasing some new equipment to support those agriculture courses, and developing curriculum to support them. We did form 8 new agriculture courses and it really took off. Students really love it. And if you are possibly one of those people who is interested in joining one of the agriculture courses, that's awesome. Or if you know anyone who is interested, please have them contact Mr. Burton Pfluger. He's our new agriculture full-time faculty member, and he'd love to connect with you. Also was asked to mention something that's really awesome, very exciting. We have our brand new Agriculture Academy that just started this fall, partnership with Texas A&M Commerce, and there's a new scholarship that is available that's sponsored by the Dallas County Master Gardeners. So very exciting news, really excited to see how this helps support our students moving forward, and please do apply for it if you are one of those students who's eligible. As my dad used to say, if you spend an hour on an application that's worth $500, you made $500 an hour. It's the best time you can possibly spend. That's a really good short-term job. But I am in Florida now, and I love it here. I'm in Gainesville, Florida. It's very sunny, very pretty. I did move to be with family, and we're closer to family here. And I'm now Chief Executive of Greens Greetings. We had a soft launch this past weekend. Our first line of products is on Etsy, leading up to our grand opening on September 15th on greensgreetings.com. We make handcrafted gifts for people who love plants. Right now they're all dried plants, but soon they will be giftable live plants. So stay tuned for that. And if you're interested in learning more, there's a QR code there that will take you right there, or the bit.ly link, or greensgreetings.com. Love to see you there. So today I'm really excited to talk to you about 3 different things. First, what can I plant now? Different fall trends in the garden. What's changed between today's war gardens, like the war against climate change and the war against COVID, in comparison to other past war gardens, and what's next? Growing in the light. So what's next for Dallas and urban gardens? So let's talk about a few trends. First trend that we're seeing this fall is continuing the edible garden. Of course, last year about this time, we were still right in the thick of the pandemic. Of course, we're still fighting the pandemic, but it just looks a little bit different now. People are still very active in growing edible plants at home, which is awesome. And if you're looking for a good book to read, books plural, I highly recommend Brie Arthur's work, The Foodscape Revolution and Growing with Grains, because she shows you how to incorporate edible plants into your existing landscape. I think she has a lot of really great techniques. One of the ways that I've seen this incorporated in Dallas is at University Park. So, just trying to move this out of the way here. You might have seen these arrangements about this time last year. I still think they're super relevant to this fall, is all of the edible plants that are inside of their fall arrangements. So there's some decorative Russian kale, some Swiss chard, pansies, which are edible flowers, and some bok choy as well. And this is the University Park City Hall. Now I'm wondering if you can spot the food in this picture. It is right here. It's some Swiss chard, Very pretty. I just think it's so beautiful how it complements the red brick, and I just think Swiss chard is a beautiful plant. Um, Folks may debate what the taste of Swiss chard, but I just think it's such a gorgeous plant. Here's Swiss chard at Mountain View campus. If you're interested in getting some experience working with some edible plants in raised beds, Mountain View campus is always looking for volunteers. And the next volunteer work day is on September 11th in the morning from 9 to 12. They have different plots that are set out and marked for different groups to use throughout the rest of the semester. And the volunteers will just be working on helping prep those beds for the fall. If you are interested, please do reach out to Keith McKinnon. His email is down there at the bottom of the screen. When you are planting edible plants, it is important to remember that not all edible plants, not all vegetables and fruits grow the same in different weather patterns. So some vegetables, like greens, prefer cooler weather, which is perfect for us this time of year. Other plants like tomatoes and peppers prefer the warmer weather. So it's a little bit late to think about planting those. If you have a plant in mind that you're interested in planting, feel free to use this guide. North Haven Gardens also has a really good guide online. And Jeff Raska from AgriLife Extension and I developed this guide to help, just in a very basic sense, identify which plants work best at different times of the year. The main key is you want to be able to plant your plants well before the average first frost in Dallas. Because, for example, if you plant okra, the seeds will come up. They will do just fine. But it'll be really unfortunate if if you're planting in mid-September and then the first frost comes in November, if they've just started to form those flowers to make those beautiful okra pods and that first frost hits and kills the plant. We want to avoid that at all costs. So we plant the okra early enough so that it has time to mature all the way before that first frost hits. And this leads into our next trend. This guide was actually developed for 5-gallon buckets. So these plants in particular do really well in a 5-gallon bucket container. If you don't have lots of space, if you don't have a yard, if you don't have area for a raised bed, all of these plants will do just fine growing in a 5-gallon bucket container or another decorative container. I know my HOA was not happy with me when I started putting 5-gallon buckets out during COVID. I had to upgrade to a more decorative container. So if that happens to you, just know you're not alone. So trend 2, high impact in small spaces. This is super relevant to us growing in the city. We're trying to make as much use of all the space that we possibly can. So this is a picture of our vertical wall at the El Centro campus. What works really well in the vertical wall are small vegetables, leafy greens, or herbs. Particularly around this time of year, you want to aim for plants that are more frost hardy or cool season herbs. And at El Centro, if you volunteer with us, you can experiment with which plants are your favorite plants and see what's your favorite and what you want to grow at home. Some ideas for you. Cool season herbs. Parsley, thyme, chives, rosemary, Greek oregano, cilantro, sage all do well in cooler weather. And some of them are even able to bounce back after that first light frost hits. Mint is very hardy, so much so that it's really best to grow mint only in a container. So if you have a really pretty place in your yard that you want to grow some mint, just know that it will quickly spread outside of that really pretty place. And I call it the edible version of crabgrass because it just takes off. It's really hard to kill off once it gets outside of where you want it to be. So just keep that in mind. But other than that, it's a really nice herb to grow in a container. Some good, cool season, smaller vegetables that will work well in smaller spaces with that high impact are radish, leaf lettuce, spinach, onions, garlic, carrots, if you have a deep enough container. Carrots, of course, and beets too. Since you're growing them for the root, you really want enough soil so that they're not going to hit a wall, be compacted, and stymie the growth of that root. You want it to be loose soil and really deep soil. That way that root can grow unimpeded. And then turnip greens and mustard greens all do well in small spaces. It's a little bit too late for potatoes, but I did include this here because I wanted to represent, this is my favorite, all-time favorite plant to grow in a 5-gallon bucket container. If you have some potatoes at home that you want to grow in a 5-gallon bucket container, just hold on to them because you don't want them to die back in any hard freezes that we have. While they're too young and haven't formed potatoes for you to harvest yet. So just hold on to them until early February. Early February is the best time to plant those spring potatoes. If you wanted to plant some potatoes in the fall, you would have had to get them in the ground by early August. So just keep that in mind. But again, wanted to mention this because they're just so much fun to grow. And it's so easy to harvest them. You just dump the bucket upside down and you have all the potatoes there. You don't have to worry about skewering them with a shovel or a hoe as you're trying to dig them up out of the soil. And kids really enjoy the magic of pulling food out of the ground. It's really cool. And this is a picture of some red mustard greens that I grew in a container, and I just really love this plant too because it's beautiful, it's very decorative, but also very healthy, very good for you with all those nutrients. Has a sharp taste, so but once you grow it, you have a higher appreciation for it, and it's a little bit easier to eat, that sharp taste, once you know what goes into it. And again, there's a lot of good nutrients in there. So trend number 3 is the wild cottage garden. You might have seen some things like this on Instagram, or for example, Taylor Swift had an album that came out that featured a lot of cottagey themes, especially during the COVID season. This idea of wanting to escape from the craziness into nature is really predominant. So the wild cottage garden has taken off. And what does that mean? Well, it's a major focus on letting nature do its thing, not manicuring bushes too much, not pruning too much, letting things be a little bit more natural shape, and a bigger focus on pollinating plants and wildflowers. So, of course, you know, our state flower, wildflower, is bluebonnet, and this is the perfect time of year to plant bluebonnet seeds. So if you have a packet of bluebonnet seeds and you've always been wondering, when should I plant these? Now is your time to shine. So anytime between now and December 15th, just scatter them out in the lawn. They will bury themselves inside the grass. They'll do just fine. And they'll come up and you'll have a really nice cottage theme come springtime. If you're interested in learning more about some Texas native plants and different pollinator supporting plants, the place for you to go within Dallas College is Brookhaven campus. They have the windmill garden there that features hundreds of types of native Texas plants, and we get so much help and guidance and support from the Texas Master Naturalists to support that garden, and they're a huge help in making sure that garden looks as beautiful as it does. If you are interested in connecting about the windmill garden, just reach out and we will send you some good contact information there. And again, once you see all those plants in person, sometimes it's easier to say, oh yeah, I really like that plant. I want to plant that in my garden. So I just think it's fun to check out and see what might be interesting to you. Another group within the community that already was focused on a cottage vibe, permaculture vibe before it was hitting the trends of fall and COVID retreats was Promise of Peace Gardens. So they have a huge focus on permaculture. Elizabeth Dry is in charge of Promise of Peace, and she does such a great job working with the youth in the community, and the soil that they have there is so rich, so dark and nutritious. It's amazing. I cannot say enough good things about what she does there. So if you are interested in checking it out, their website is really easy to find, just Promise of Peace Gardens. And I know they're always looking for volunteers to help with the garden. Okay, so what's changed between all of our COVID gardens and past gardens that were popular back in the day? So Victory Gardens back during World War I, World War II, were always a focus on growing food to cut food costs. Because of course, with supply and demand, if your demand is high because you're sending food overseas to support your troops while they're on the front lines, that makes the supply go down, the price goes up. And in order to bring that price down, you need to increase supply somehow. So we turned to homeowners to grow a lot of food. And it was seen as a very patriotic thing to do, to support the war effort, support our troops that are overseas while we're at home. And it gave a lot of citizens the feeling of community, helped them be outside, growing things with their hands, so it contributed to their physical and mental well-being, but also gave them a sense of purpose in really contributing to their country. Nowadays, we don't have that war sense as much as it is a sense of the urgency of the changing climate and how gardens help pull down carbon out of the atmosphere and help remediate some of those effects of the climate change. So, for example, the Climate Victory Gardens that are supported by greenamerica.org, they show some data here that about over 9,000 gardens equals 4,500 tons of carbon being pulled out of the atmosphere each year, because of course carbon dioxide is fixed by plants into sugars through photosynthesis. So it's taking all that carbon dioxide out of the air, releasing oxygen. And that eliminates emissions from 38 million miles driven. Green America, highly recommend their video that they have online. They walk through 5 different steps that you can take to create your own victory climate victory garden. First, ditch the chemicals. So don't use the pesticides, don't use synthetic fertilizers, just focus on compost and providing organic sources of nutrients, and pruning and taking out pests, taking out weeds by hand to prevent chemicals from really negatively affecting, sabotaging really, the soil microbiota, all the microorganisms that are living in the soil. Second, keep the soil covered. Again, focus on the soil microorganisms. When you're keeping the soil covered, you're keeping it cooler, you're preventing all the water loss from the soil, which helps with those healthy soil microbes that support the health of the plants. And encourage biodiversity. So, for example, plant in this picture, corn, carrot, peas, beans, tomatoes, cabbage, leeks, instead of just all carrots or all tomatoes. Even though we all love tomatoes, it's good to have some variety within the garden to break up and add some diversity into our ecosystem there.
Kara,
yeah, go for it.
I might have missed it, but when you say keep the soil covered, keep it covered with what?
Oh, yeah, good point. Mulch, twofold. When plants are growing, you want to keep it covered with some mulch. Second, if you don't have any plants growing, say the frost has come through and it's just killed off all of your tomato plants or your pepper plants and you've pulled them out, it's a really good time to start sowing some cover crops that'll just cover the soil until you grow some more vegetable plants. So it's always good to have plants growing in the soil to help support that the soil microorganisms. So either covered with mulch or covered with just another plant. So good question. For grow food, the emphasis here being obvious, but if you're growing your own food, you're preventing food from being grown, for example, in California and being trucked over here and transported, a few hundred miles to our dinner plates in Dallas. And 5, compost. So the more you compost, you'll have 2 benefits. One, you'll have rich food for your plants. So it'll be full of nutrients that'll help feed your crops in the future. Second, you're also preventing any greenhouse gases from being released as they're buried deep within the landfill. So if it's being broken down in a compost pile, it's helping your plants and it's preventing greenhouse gas emissions from landfills. Okay, if you're doing all 5 of those things and you feel your garden qualifies as a climate victory garden, I think it would be really cool if you went online and registered your garden on this map. It won't ask for your exact address, so no privacy concerns there. But you can see that parts of Texas are not strongly represented on this map. So I think it would be really cool if there was a really strong presence of all the climate victory gardens in Dallas. And this again is found on greenamerica.org. Okay, comparisons to past victory gardens. So this is an illustration from the 1940s depicting an example of what a victory garden could look like to get people's wheels turning. Like, oh, yes, maybe I could plant 2 rows of peas, 15 feet long and 24 inches apart. That is very different from where a lot of our millennial growers are. Not all of them have access to land. And again, if you look at this picture that I showed earlier from the COVID pandemic, where is she? She's on a balcony growing plants. So, and this is well documented that US millennials they just don't own as many homes as Gen X and the baby boomers did back when they were 30 years old in comparison. So this article by Forbes, US Millennials, Home Ownership and the Growing Chasm Between Aspiration and Reality. Yeah, a lot of millennials want to own homes, but for whatever reason can't afford them or just aren't at a good place in time to purchase a home. So what we see then is growing in containers. So it looks very different from the victory gardens in the 1940s in ground. A lot more millennials are growing, but they are growing in containers. So these are some containers that I was growing in my parking lot back in Dallas, because that was the access to land that I had. And they received really good sun here. And thankfully my neighbors were okay with it. Also back in the day, we had a lot of support for children growing plants during the school day. And so this is back during World War I. This is World War II era victory gardens, some school children planting at school and taking care of gardens. And another picture, I think this is from the Bronx, actually. And nowadays, so this is a shout out to Kim Amin, who's leading the North Texas School Garden Network, and bringing together all the school gardens in North Texas area to help support them. So I want to encourage you to reach out to your school to help support them in their school garden efforts, because I think this is something that the government supported in the past during the Victory Garden eras of World War I and World War II. Now it's a struggle to continue to keep these gardens alive. School funding is always going down, and it's just always an important skill to teach kids because they're our future food growers, and it's an important life skill for them to learn. So what's next? Growing in the light. So I wanted to mention a few things. The Sustainable Development Goals, you might have seen these. These are the SDGs from the United Nations. They have a heavy focus on reduced inequalities to support sustainability. So I think in the spirit of sustainability, one of the three pillars that uphold sustainability is social responsibility. So there's environment and economic responsibility, but also a social responsibility within sustainability. And we would be remiss if we did not mention the fact that in World War II, there was a huge injustice done to the farmers out in California, specifically the Japanese American farmers. So back, and I'll just read this from the report, in 1940, the average value of Japanese American run farms was $280 per acre, according to the 1982 US government report. That compared with an average of $38 per acre for all farms. So Japanese American run farms were so valuable because they were very labor intensive. They grew very intensively. You can see in the top right corner there, farmers in San Leandro, California, transplanting young tomato plants. Those are very densely planted young tomato plants. It's very intensive, but they were very high yielding because of that. And a lot of specifically white farmers were not happy about the fact that they were getting pushed out of the market by these very high yielding Japanese American farmers. And that was one of the motivating forces behind putting a lot of Japanese Americans into internment camps and concentration camps. So again, from another report, in 1942, Japanese American-owned farms were expected to provide half of the canning tomatoes and 95% of all fresh snap beans for the war effort. They were also the primary growers of strawberries for civilian consumption. The colorful, upbeat, whitewashed victory gardening posters do nothing to hint at the over 6,100 farms that were taken from Japanese Americans, estimated to be worth over $1.3 billion today. So not only were we sending food overseas to support our troops, but on the supply side, we were losing lots of food because of all of these Japanese Americans, which were very wrongfully put in these camps. From the 120,000 people of Japanese descent in the US concentration camps, 2/3 were US citizens, and 0%, none, not a single one of these Japanese Americans were found guilty of serious spying charges during World War II. So just from a sustainability lens, we need to be very conscious of not just the environmental effects, but what we're doing to other people. The injustices that are being done to our farmers, to our other US citizens that we really need to stand alongside of and fight for equity with, just like we're fighting for environmental justice. So how does this affect us? What's the semblance to Dallas? Well, Dallas is actually on stolen land as well. So this is from the Dallas Truth and Racial Healing Report. That's very excellent. Highly recommend that you check it out. So this land was stolen from the indigenous Caddo people, and they were farmers as well. They were a very intensive agricultural society. And the Trinity River was once named the Arkakosa River, and some were thinking of changing it back to the Arkakosa River name. In Dallas, there was also hostility between white and Black communities, specifically the bombing of Black homes as they moved into predominantly white areas, and police did nothing about it. Jim Schutze wrote an amazing, extraordinary book called The Accommodation, and the release and the printing was held up for 20 years. It was printed once 20 years ago, never reprinted again, and now it's finally being reprinted for this story to come back to light. So I highly recommend that you check it out. It's just being released this month. I looked it up. I think it's $30 from Target. You can just buy it online for $30 now, and it used to be $300 before because it was such a rare book. In the CCAP report, we see that this remnant of segregated housing affects us still today. And the low income and low access to affordable food, it affects, disproportionately affects communities of color. So we have awesome local champions leading the effort to fight this food apartheid, this very intentional bias against communities of color in limiting healthy food access. Ples Montgomery IV and his mom, Betty Montgomery, founded the veggie store, the Oak Cliff Veggie Project. Their Facebook link with all their awesome information is right there. And they also have a website too that's linked through the Facebook. And they were featured in an amazing documentary called A Food Justice Story. And that is actually being aired sometime in November on TV. And those dates are on the Facebook page as well. But the Oak Cliff Veggie Project meets several times a week to train folks in how to grow their own food and also give out food to free of charge to the community, which is supplied by the Harvest Project with Danae Gutierrez. At Dallas College, we also have awesome student leaders from PTK who led the movement to start a petition to add more urban gardens to the Mountain View area code, which is technically a food desert. All the zip codes encompassed there. And they were awesome. I led a workshop to teach other students how to grow their own food and promote awareness of the need for healthy food access in South Dallas. And then just wanted to wrap up by talking about the importance of having more Black farmers and how there were actually a fair number of Black farmers, more than there are today, but they were either forced off their land or through some other means forced off their land. So now Soul Fire Farm is leading a movement and really supporting a movement to help train more Black farmers and help them gain access to land, which is expensive, of course. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend the book Farming While Black and all of the events that they do online. I really like this quote, all revolution is based on land, on his t-shirt there by Malcolm X. It's very true. So that's what I think is coming up in the next wave of Victory Gardens. It's going to be more focused on the social aspect of sustainability, that third pillar of sustainability, in making sure what we're doing to the earth, but also to each other, is equitable. And that I'll end with this quote here from the Ron Finley Project over in California, I think. This work isn't just about the garden or food, it's about freedom, and beyond that, it's about people. So I wanted to, I know I don't normally just talk right through the presentation, normally a little bit more conversational, but I'll just pause here and ask if there's any questions, and I'll also go back to the growing slide to help answer any questions about just plain growing plants and which plants grow best where. So we will go back to the growing slide here.
So one of the questions is this being recorded? And it is. And we are still working. We are very close to releasing our new Dallas College Media Hub that has the previous webinars on it, and it will include today's as well.
Yes. And I'm a little embarrassed that I forgot to include my email address on these slides. I normally do that because it's normally a DCCD email, but it's just my name with a J in between. That's my middle initial. So Kara J. Casey at gmail.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. You can just reach out to me anyway, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Okay, Georgian put it through in the chat there too.
Okay. You know, it's been a month and we have a new version of this, and so I don't see any more questions in the chat, and I'm trying to find the Q&A now. Give me just a second. There it is. Don't see anything right now.
Okay, cool.
So, Kara, tell us, is the weather quite different in Florida where you are now, or do they have similar growing seasons?
Yeah, it's pretty different. It's a lot more humid than Dallas. You know, Houston, of course, is a lot more humid than Dallas, so I guess it's more comparable to that. It rains a lot more often, so in Dallas, I'd be watering a lot, but here it just rains in the summertime, so there's more of a rainy season feel to it. And the main difference is the soil. So the soil is very sandy in Florida, and it's very clay in Dallas. So that's the main difference.
And what do you recommend for clay soil in Dallas if you're growing vegetables?
Good question. So you can amend it with different things. Compost, so you can buy bags of compost. And so that's a quicker way to start amending it, just add tons of compost. Something that'll help long-term is leaves. Just continue to pile leaves in there, mulch the leaves, break them down into little bits, and incorporate that into the soil. That'll break down and break up the soil. Yeah, those are my main recommendations, just tons of compost. Yeah.
Okay. So usually in Dallas this time of year, everything is brown, and we've had so much rain this year. It's still gorgeous and green and lush here. So I would imagine that's what it looks like where you are, since you get so much rain.
Yes, it's very, very lush, very green. The main difference in wildlife, other than the alligators, There are alligators here. Never saw an alligator hanging out in a pond in Dallas. But the geckos, tons of geckos all over the place. I had seen maybe one or two on the roof at El Centro. Granted, we're in the city downtown in El Centro, but tons of geckos all over the place. But I'm not complaining because it brings the bug population down. So whatever eats mosquitoes is my friend.
So do you have any last thoughts?
No, just other than I'm really proud of all the work that the School Gardens Network is doing. Just reach out to them if you are interested in volunteering. Kim Amen, and it's just North Texas School Garden Network on Facebook. So I know supporting our young children in learning how to grow their own food is really important. And they'll be the change agents for the future. So I just really appreciate being with you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We appreciate you. And with that, we will end this webinar.